Hello there. Well, you've just caught me hanging up my jacket for the last time and getting ready to go back to my shop work. I've spent the last 6 years working at Western Approaches, working long hours towards the war effort. But now the war is coming to an end, I just have to return to my life before. That means that children are also getting ready to head back to school. Now, life won't be quite as it was before after everything we've gone through. For some children in World War II, the war has been a time of fear, confusion and separation of families, the destruction of a home or even the loss of a parent. For others, the war years have been some of the most exciting times of their lives.
As you all know, for cities that were in danger of air attacks, the first plan for children in the event of war was that they should be evacuated to the countryside. Large numbers of children and schools were evacuated, but a lot of the children did not go. Their parents didn't want them to go, or they didn't want to go. Many fathers and mothers were out at work, but many schools weren't running, so the children were missing free milk and free meals, which were very important. As the war went on, and when the Blitz started in September 1940, schools were being requisitioned for civil defence, and therefore were closing down. A child's educational experience really depended on where they were based. Some children had open-air classes, some lessons were held in chapels, pubs, and even church crypts. 1 in 5 of the country schools were damaged by bombing and many others were requisitioned by the government. Children were crammed into classes and stationery and books were in short supply. Young male teachers were called up into the forces and older teachers were brought out of retirement to replace them.
After the war, a significant number of children failed to reach the required levels of literacy and numeracy. However, many spent their time doing their part for the country. Children of all ages could get involved in the war effort. Older boys and girls joined the Boy Scouts and Girl Guides. They supported air raid precautions by acting as messengers or fire watchers. Younger children helped salvage war materials, raised money for munitions, or knitted comforts for the troops. As a result of the crisis in education that occurred because of the war, everyone agreed that something needed to be done, and so it was that major reforms were brought in after the war. Though some children had been in school sporadically throughout the war, others hadn't, but they were all returning to a life and a system that hadn't been fully functioning for quite some time. In 1944, the Labour government implemented the Education Act 1944, which created a 3-tier school system involving secondary schools and for the first time in Britain ensured the provision of free education for all children. The new system of secondary schools would cater for children aged between 11 to 15 and divide the children to 3 distinct types of schooling. These were grammar, technical and secondary modern schools. Entry to the schools would be determined by a universal examination, known as the 11+. In theory, this would allow children to be allocated to the school which would best suit their ability.
British schoolwear has varied over time, depending on styles and ages of children. When the war broke out in 1939, school uniform was generally a universally understood symbol of the British educational system. School uniforms were relaxed during the war as a consequence of practical concerns, but were kept where possible from a strong desire to carry on as normal, and to give the sense of national identity, which was particularly important in a period of conflict when such an identity was at risk. When clothing was rationed in 1941, any new school uniform produced had to conform to the austerity regulations. Therefore, extra pleats, buttons, and pockets were removed. However, some private schools clung on to their uniform requirements. This determination to carry on as usual during the conflict was partly due to school uniforms being a prominent symbol of normality. Rationing continued in the immediate post-war period, and it was some years before fabric and clothing supplies were fully restored. Clothes rationing was finally abolished in 1949.
The Second World War had an impact across all levels of society, and at the end a great deal of attention was paid to children due to the time they had missed. This increased interest in the young encouraged teenagers to develop their own sense of identity, and new cultures emerged associated with shared passions and ideas. Schools even began to change some of their uniform policies, and some schools took this informality even further, and under increasing pressure from older teenagers for freedom of expression, they relaxed their rules completely for sixth form pupils. This relaxation of uniform went hand in hand with a newly casual relationship between teacher and pupil and an increased focus on child-centred teaching practices. Sometimes, facing difficult situations shows us how to move forward, but when we are faced with these situations, we are often waiting to go back to normal, but that's not always the best solution, and we can find new ways to move forward.
No lights in the streets, 2 ounces of sweets, spitfires in the air, gas masks to wear, U-boats in the sea, spam fritters for tea, a battle of wits, survived the blitz, Churchill and the wireless, blood torches and swears, our country needs us, 'cause it's not over yet. Mom's working the land, Glenn Miller's big band, let's make do and mend, when will it end? Dad's off to the war, who knows what's instead, when you're a kid in World War II. Trains wait at the station, we're going away, an evacuation to a safe place to stay. Searchlights on the planes,